The 80s were a very special time for the automotive industry. It was the age of the yuppie, the age of tech, the age of the modern car as we know it today. So we've come here to Radwood 2024 to answer a very important question. What is it that makes 80s cars so special? So one thing the 80s brought along was unprecedented luxury. The economy was booming, and so Aston Martin thought they'd try their hand at an executive saloon. Now, you tend to think of imposing executive saloons as having these massive monolithic front grills, but Aston Martin went for a completely different angle. Quite literally, as you can see, I don't think there's a round spot on this entire car. We've got a razor tip front edge, and it just goes and goes and goes as this massive block wedge. It's absolutely gorgeous. Now, luxury was at the very forefront of this kind of machine. It's very limited production. I think they only made about 500 examples of each series. The Series 1 was vastly different to this, and then the Series 2 and 3 and 4 were just pure angles everywhere. This has got leather plastered everywhere. You can only just about tell where the speakers are. Even those are covered in leather. You only have little pinhole perforations so that the sound can get through. Now, I think where this peaks is if you're sitting in the back, it's got a TV, like many executive saloons might have. But this one, obviously, is a CRT because it was still the 1980s, and that means an absolutely massive box between those two front seats. And I'd argue that's probably why this car is so wide. It's gorgeous, it's lovely, it's luxurious, but I don't think I would quite want to parallel park it. It wasn't just enhanced luxury that came along with the 1980s. There was also performance. Now, few know performance better than Porsche. Now, the 959 was prepared for homologation in Group B Rally, but a lot of production issues meant that it never actually made it out until just after the Group B period had ended, which was a massive shame for a number of reasons. But they still had a great performer in their hands, and so they let it go and brought it out for regular consumers to use. Now, this thing had so many different features on it, not least of all, for a brief period, it was the fastest car in the world, at least up until 1987, when the Ferrari F40 came along and messed it up for everybody. This hit a top speed of 197 miles per hour. It did 0 to 60 in less than 4 seconds in 1984, and then went on to just casually win the Paris-Dakar like it was nothing. This thing is an insane piece of tech. Porsche knew that to have any chance at winning rally, they would need all-wheel drive. Thanks, Audi. So they packed that in here, and it's sculpted for aero everywhere. Reviewers of the time were a little bit intimidated by all the new performance tech that had been packed into it, but were delighted to find that it didn't actually have two different driving characteristics to the equivalent 964 turbo of the time. So it packed speed, performance, tech everywhere, all-wheel drive, and still was about as easy to drive as your average 911. How much better does it get than that? So we've had luxury, we've had performance. One other thing that the 80s was very famous for, and that is design. This here is the Koenig BMW 635 CSI. Now, Koenig were famous for a lot of things, not least of all their absolutely radical design. The venerable Sharknose 635 was, some would say, fell victim, but others would say greatly enhanced by their hand. It's got this one continuous strake. It arguably starts down here in the front quarter, follows all the way up the driver's side door, all the way up, back over the wheel, and then continues round to the rear wing. It's a completely radical design. It's got these massive Pirelli 345 section tires on the rear. Now, Koenig did some work with Ferraris, notably the Testarossa, where they strapped two massive turbos to the thing and made it almost completely undrivable, whereas this remained on the inside mostly unmolested. But still, what a hell of a look. The 635 is still a relatively controversial design today, with the Sharknose not necessarily working for everyone on the coupe body style. But I think it's special, it's definitely a Koenig special, and it's definitely one for the books. It may not be the most exciting thing about the 1980s car scene, but along came safety. Now, who knew safety better than our good friends over at Volvo? They pioneered the seatbelt, they were some of the first to put airbags in cars, and this, the 740 GL, is shaped like a brick and also built like one. This particular example, some of you may be familiar with, it belongs to a certain YouTube channel called Furious Driving. He's not around right now, so he doesn't know I'm filming this, but look at this. I mean, these cars have been known to go, Volvos have clubs for mileage. They go all the way up to 300,000 miles in some examples. It's an absolutely gorgeous thing, and they are indestructible, these cars. So, along with the 80s also came technology. Now, you may think old American car, monolithic, massive V8 in the front, but this C4 Corvette was a bit of a departure from the standard stone hammer approach that American cars used to take beforehand. This one is a little later, so it came with the LT1, and it is famed for its electronic LCD gauge cluster that gave readouts for essential metrics such as your speed and your RPM. They may have been liable to failure in the future, but it was a great example of cramming tech into early cars. The LT1 also came with tuned port injection, as this car was so proud of, they decided to plaster it along the side. Now, that may not be a massive deal these days, but it gave boosts to both efficiency and, of course, the big one, performance. And this car is really something special, and it absolutely screams 1980s, almost peak 1980s, you could say. Here's a bit of a wild card for you. The 1980s also saw the birth of the MPV. Well, that was the Mazda, but this is a Toyota Space Cruiser, purpose-built for carrying families. Before the SUV, we had this. It's really quite something special. This one is surprisingly similar to the Volkswagen bus that you might be more familiar with, in that it has barely any front overhang. There's you sitting there, and then there is the wall directly in front of you, and very little in between. Believe it or not, they actually became rather cool. Even rap groups such as Wu-Tang Clan were talking about rolling around in MPVs. People would pimp them out by putting massive sound systems in them well into the 90s. These things are controversial, but they serve their purpose and they did it well. Stop typing, I see your comment. This may be known as a 1990s car, but I'll have you know it was actually launched right at the tail end of the 80s in 1989, and it illustrates a point perfect for how I'd like to conclude this video. The 80s may have brought tech, they may have brought luxury, they may have brought performance, they may have brought safety, but it was still the era where you could still get a car that was simple, a car that you could work on yourself, and a car that didn't actually have any traction control or ABS, much like this. Now, I had a 1996 model of this. It was a Japanese import, and it still had no airbags, no ABS, no traction control, no nothing. They took the simple British Roadster, made it Japanese, which basically just meant they made it a heck of a lot more reliable. And it was a great success. They sold over 1 million of these things over the years. One of the most successful sports cars of all time, and certainly one of the most recognizable with those little pop-up headlights. The 80s brought so many things along, but it still managed to keep things simple. And to me, that is the beauty of 1980s cars. And this is a great example. So, I think that's done a pretty good job of illustrating what was just so special about the 80s. Granted, it was special for a lot of us, but for the cars, I say especially so. And I think this show has done an excellent example of showing off just why. It's not always about progress and luxury and tech and speed. Sometimes we have to just look back and appreciate that we could still work on our own things. Things were still simple, both in the cars and in the times. And yet, here we are with such a plethora of different examples and different reasons of why I, in particular, love this era so much. So with that, thank you ever so much for joining me. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed already, do give that lovely red button below me a little tickle, and perhaps you'll see more of this in the future. In any case, hope to see you very soon. Cheers.